we're talking about redefining social, and it seems a little bit strange when the medium is so much in its infancies. It seems like we've only really just sort of got out of nappies in terms of social. But we must be reaching some level of maturity in the medium if parents are starting to call their children after social elements. I don't know if anybody saw this article in Mashable during the week, but parents have called their child hashtag. So this is hashtag. Hashtag Jemison, I believe, is her last name, and parents quite enamoured with Twitter, and she's a rather auspicious start in life as she is already trending on Twitter. So well done, hashtag. And of course there was another baby born last year that was named Facebook. Rick, you possibly know that baby born in...
My kid.
It was your kid. All right. So we're probably reaching some level of maturity in the market. But when we look at the stats, I think certainly we're seeing a level of maturity amongst some of the bigger players in social media. This is some data from ComScore. It's looking at October 2011 right through to just last month. And what we're seeing is that we're gaining a level of consistency, certainly amongst the bigger players. Facebook do about 1.8 million unique users every month. YouTube about 1.5 million unique users. And if that's a sign of maturity, then certainly I think we're beginning to see that. And for those who might suggest that Facebook's popularity might be waning slightly, Rick, you might cover that later. Certainly the figures aren't bearing that out in terms of unique users, but we are seeing a slight decline year on year in terms of number of minutes spent on Facebook. But what's possibly more interesting is when we look at, let's call it the lower levels of the graph. We look at social networks like LinkedIn or Twitter or Google+, and seeing the level of growth that we're seeing at that area of the graph. And I think that's probably where we're going to see growth in the future, is new social networks beginning to gain traction in the market. So certainly I think level of maturity, but lots more growth to come. And it's an ever-changing market, as Kieran said. When we talk about redefining social, we're redefining social every single day. It's constantly changing. Every year it changes and there's something different in social. And this year has been no different. We've seen things like the changes to the Facebook timeline, which were both, I think, fans were both happy and sad about. There's always a problem when somebody changes your Facebook profile page. There's always a bit of aggro. And we also saw the rise of Instagram, subsequently bought by Facebook. We've seen LinkedIn and Twitter changing profile pages and improving user experiences. So we've seen changes in how the actual interface looks of these platforms. And of course, we've seen some new players in the market. So earlier this year, we began to hear more about Pinterest, and it's beginning to gain traction in the market. And the previous stats showed how Pinterest is doing. And more recently, we're beginning to hear things about the fancy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So I think there's consistently lots and lots of new things happening in social. And what I wanted to talk about this evening was just maybe 7 key areas that we think at Carat might redefine social in the coming years. And the first of these is measurement. And I think really we're at, if you like, the end of a honeymoon period when it comes to measuring social media. At present, marketers measure 3 key things in social media. So we measure how many fans or followers we've got. We measure how much traffic is driven to a website as a result of social, or we measure the number of social mentions. But there was a recent eMarketer survey that I think was quite telling. It found that only 20% of marketers felt like they were getting quantifiable return on investment from social. So I think certainly that's something that all of us here in this room are going to have to work hard together, is try and work out how we can quantify return on investment better in social channels. And let's be clear, return on investment doesn't mean using social directly to sell. It can mean distributing coupons and seeing what the redemption is like in an offline world. It can mean taking that referral traffic into your website and understanding where that goes afterwards and what converts. So it's not just the pure sale, but understanding what's the return on investment. And certainly I think in 2013, I'd like to see that we move from looking at engagement that's based on size of engagement, much more to engagement that's based on quality of engagement. And I think that's really important that we all try and move towards those more important metrics, and also towards really beginning to mine the data and understand our consumers and understand the different consumer segments and how they're behaving in social channels. And I think that's a really important redefinement that we can look forward to. No-brainer, I think, to say that mobile will be a dominant force in social. We know that smartphone penetration by the end of the year in Ireland will be at 71%, is the prediction. And a staggering 63% of internet users use mobile to connect to the internet purely to engage with social communities. That's huge. There's a very nice piece of data, if you can get it from Accenture, that just came out last week, that highlights some of these key statistics in relation to mobile, and particularly mobile and social. And a very nice piece of research. It looks at a number of different countries, and interestingly, it says that Ireland is second only to Brazil in terms of our access of the internet through mobile. So mobile, I think, without doubt, is going to be a really important channel for us in the future. And I think also in terms of mobile, the report that Accenture brought out also showed that there was a very clear growth in terms of the visual aspects within mobile. And I think that's almost a perfect marriage, if you like, of visual, social content driven through mobile. And I think we're going to see much more of that. And who would have thought, you know, earlier this year that we'd have seen the sheer rise of visual channels, social channels, such as Pinterest, such as Instagram, such as SlideShare, for example. So visual, I think, is going to become even more and more important, and we're going to see much more visual traction in social channels. We already know, for example, when we put a post on a Facebook status update and we attach a photo to it, you can get up to 20% better engagement by including a photo in a post. So much so that one of the golden rules, I think, is always try and have a photo in every status update you do. It certainly improves the impact. So I think certainly more engagement can be delivered through visual, and there's an onus on all of us to work really hard to create or curate social engagement pieces that will allow us to tell our brand stories, and I think that will be a very important trend in the future. Again, I think a bit of a no-brainer to say that social commerce will be a reality. We've been talking kind of around it for a while, but I think it'll definitely become a reality. There's a global consultancy group called Booz & Co, and they estimated recently that social commerce would be worth $30 billion by 2015. But already I think we're beginning to see some sort of if you like, indicators that that will be the case. Recently, Pampers sold 1,000 units of their product on Facebook in just under an hour. It's a phenomenal amount to sell that fast. And we also know that Groupon say that they sold $11 million worth of Gap vouchers through social channels in just one day. So there's already stories coming out that I think are pointing to the likelihood of social commerce becoming a reality. But I think it's probably unlikely to be in its current form. Certainly from my perspective, I feel social commerce at the moment is a little bit clunky, doesn't work very, very well. It's not a nice, fluid process, and I think there will certainly be improvements in that area. And I mentioned The Fancy earlier, very interesting site, and because it's relatively new, your name might still be available, so maybe go home and get your name. But I think that will be a very, very interesting development to see how sites like this will gain traction from an e-commerce perspective. So Fancy allows you to upload photos, has seamless connection to the photo, the shop of the photo, where you can actually buy more seamlessly. So I think we're going to see much more traction in terms of better use of e-commerce within social channels. And I think that leads me to another point, which is fragmentation. We've already seen in the chart I showed earlier that there are more social channels, and I think they will begin to grow and grow. I used to think certainly that I was only going to be able to cope with one social channel, that I had joined Facebook, I had all my friends, all my stuff there, and there's just no way I'm going to engage in another social channel. It's just not going to happen. I mean, there's too much to do in the world. But I think increasingly we're getting very good at understanding what social channels do for us and being able to segment those social channels and say, well, Facebook is for this, and Twitter is for this, and LinkedIn is for this. And I think more of that segmentation will start to happen. And I think just like other media, we'll begin to see social channels emerging that are really powerful at targeting specific niches. And again, for us as advertisers, we're going to have to think about how we actually use those niches, and it'll become much more like other media in that regard. Customer service, I think, is already being used extensively in social channels, and I think that will be expected. We can expect to see that grow. And probably what we can expect to see is more migration from more traditional channels into social channels, and those social channels being used much more extensively for customer service. And indeed, we may even see them being used, the social platforms being used much more in businesses as well, because social platforms are highly efficient ways to actually deal with customers and groups of people. Certainly at Carat, we're already using social networks already. Maybe it's not that advanced, but we're using social networks to get groups of our colleagues from around the world organised around certain themes, and using social platforms to organise our work. And I think certainly we'll see more of that. And then very lastly, just to touch on social search, I think probably the most important redefinement, and hopefully our colleagues of Facebook, Twitter, Google will touch on this as well, because I think this is really probably the most pertinent or certainly the most prominent redefinement that we'll see. Almost everything starts with search, and search is increasingly social. Not just the fact that we're now using Facebook or Twitter as search engines in and of themselves to search for things, but search in the traditional sense is increasingly including social elements from the social graph, so our own social activity. So it's going to be more important for us to be able to optimize our social experience so that we appear in search listings. So that's, I think, the buzzword for next year will probably be SMO, social media optimization, and that's going to be key. We're going to have to look more closely at how we can actually optimize social objects, so the videos we create, the photographs we take, the content that we create, and really learn how to optimize that fully to take advantage of it in search listings. So really, those are just some of the things that we at Carat feel will redefine social in the future, and hopefully we'll hear more from the horse's mouth on how that might affect our businesses.